Rundown of how we came about. But first, I'm going to have Steve introduce Bill.
I want to thank Bill for being willing to come tonight. I'm excited about hearing what he has to say. I wouldn't say that Bill's been around for Sweetser's entire history, but as we got ready for the Sesquicentennial, I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to hear a little bit of his knowledge, and just for those, probably many of you know Bill better than I do. I'm a newcomer. I've only been in the area.
Not telling.
Huh? And they're not telling. I've only been in the area for about 5 years. I moved into the area to teach at Indiana Wesleyan University. So that's kind of how I know Bill. Bill's been adjuncting for us at IWU for a couple of years, and we really appreciate him over there. Bill grew up in Angola, Indiana, which I didn't even know was a town until we talked to Bill about it. He went to Indiana University, taught at Marion High School from 1969 to 2012, which is an impressive career at a single place at a time where it's pretty normal for people to kind of jump around place to place. And sort of late in his career, and since he's retired, he's adjuncted at a number of different places, teaching history at Ball State, and Taylor, IWU, and Anderson University. Within the last 20 years, he's helped out at all those places. Bill's an award-winning teacher. He received the Indiana History Teacher of the Year in 2000. He's worked on oral history projects at Marion High School with his Marion High School students over the course of his career. I've had a chance to kind of poke around in the collection of oral histories that he's collected, and it's pretty impressive. He helped to co-publish a book called Rough Times: An Oral History of Grant County. I only say all that stuff to say he knows what he's talking about when he comes here to share with us. He's had a crucial involvement with a lot of public service organizations throughout the years, including Marion Public Library, the Indiana Historical Society, and a bunch of other places that are trying to preserve Grant County history and Marion history, and I appreciate what he does. I think probably for me, his greatest qualification to come and talk to us is as a world-class storyteller. And so if you can get Bill telling stories, you could probably spend the rest of the day talking to Bill. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say about Sweetser, and I'd like to welcome him now.
It's sort of with some degree of fear that I speak to you tonight, because, I'm talking to people who know. This is not, you are not an uninformed audience. You are residents of Sweetser and proud residents of Sweetser, and believe you me, I don't have any trouble being correct, all right? Or I remember one time, this is when I first started doing this, I spoke to a group in Marion called the Department Club. I don't know if you're familiar with the Department Club, and it's been a club of long standing in Marion. The Department Club goes all the way back to actually auxiliary to the DAR. And so it's still there. It's still in action. Now we're dealing with great granddaughters, not daughters, but that's the way it goes. No, but I was talking one time, and I told this story, and I've forgotten what it was, but one of the ladies, senior ladies of the group, was sitting in the front row, and she had trouble hearing and all that stuff, but she caught the story, and I thought, she kept looking at me like this when I was telling the story, because I was naming names, and afterwards she said, "I want to talk to you." I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble now, because I probably tagged a relative, or I've done something. And I came over, she said, "I want you to sit down." And all the ladies were tripping out. And she said, "I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. It's even better than what you said." And it was. So I'm here to learn too. Okay, so I'll start out with a story, not about Sweetser, but about the suburb of Sweetser, Mere, right? One of the things I enjoyed in this research, all of it, is reading the papers, and also reading other people's mail and reading their diaries. That's what historians do, right? Sometimes for thousands of years, but that's what we do. I was reading the paper, and there was these little, they had paper had those items like, Swayze, Sweetser, Converse, Van Buren, those sections that were just that stuff. And usually it's kind of neat. It'll say, like Wendy Lou Jones and her husband Pete visited their niece in Chicago, and there's actually some pretty good stuff in there, even if you don't know them. But anyways, there was an item from Mir. I'm here to tell you that Mir never got many mentions in the paper. I thought, Mir, all right. Well, it had to do, this was 1890, and a lady had come to town in the wagon, apparently to get some supplies, and she stopped at one of the stores. When I say one store, maybe the one store, but she stopped at a store in Mir to take care of her business, and she hitched the wagon up and she started walking over, and so there was a guy on the porch, or on the porch, who made an untoward remark. Now, we don't know what the untoward remark was, but she was offended. And it said, the lady went to her wagon and picked out of the back of the wagon a cowhide. Now, we know what we're talking about when we're talking about a cowhide? Okay, it was a whip made out of a cowhide, and gave the gentleman a sound thrashing. And she forced him to apologize, and then got back in the wagon and went back to the farm. So, beautiful story about pioneer womanhood, It wasn't all Little House on the Prairie. But anyways, we're here to talk about Sweetser tonight, and not Mir. So we'll get started. I started looking for resources on Mir, on Sweetser, and I thought, I wonder how much is out there. Actually, there's quite a bit. And I'll mention this, and if maybe you all have had a chance to look at it during the time of your celebration. But I found a really excellent article from the Marion Chronicle. I believe it's 1999. Okay, so that would be the previous anniversary. It was called Sweetser, a town that switched names 3 times. Something like that, by Richard Simons. Richard Simons was my predecessor as county historian, and a really talented journalist. He wrote articles for the Annapolis Star, and he's written a few books on Grant County and the railroads and that sort of business. And I do recommend it. And they have this article on file at the Marion Public Library in the Indiana Room, and it is available. I should have made copies. I have a photographic copy here, but it's excellent. It really is terrific in terms of specific names and dates and places. And I'll just show you. This was, maybe, I don't know if you've seen this. This is a picture of the railroad station. Super article. All right. The other thing that I looked at, and this is my longtime favorite. I don't know if any of you ever had a chance to pick one of these up. Now, this is a reproduction. Some people actually still have copies of the 1877 original Kingman Brothers Atlas of Grant County. And see, 1877 puts it, 7 years, into Sweetser's being. But it's well done, and I'll show you. They do include, by the way, this is the actual size of the real book, okay? Pictures of various farms in the area, and it's all of Pleasant Township, not only Sweetser, but it's got the Jonathan Seeger farm, Joseph Bloomer, and the entire Bloomer family. Now they're the only ones in the entire book where the whole family's put in there. Now you do realize, of course, that these books, all of these county histories, were sold by subscription. So they come calling on your door and say, "We're doing an atlas of Grant County, and I'm sure you'd like to have your family in there, and for $10 we'll see that they're in there." And for $20 you can actually write the article yourself, and we'll edit it for you. Okay, then they would go to you and say, you know, your neighbor here they're buying a whole page like this. I'm sure you would want to be left out. You know, that kind of stuff. So it's hardly unbiased history. Although the thing that it has, I have marked my. This is a really kind of a difficult book to. Okay, they have got enlarged 1870 plat books. All right, and when I was looking at Pleasant Township, I thought they didn't have these things in. I'm sorry, I apologize. When I was looking for, I still am, Pleasant Township, it should be, right here. Okay. When I was looking for Pleasant Township, I was interested in sort of deciphering this because I hadn't looked at these in a very long time. And it has going through, it would be east of here, the Peru Road. Peru Road. Well, it looked all over. It's this very sort of parallels the Mississinawa. Okay, and I thought, oh, this is a highway, the Peru Road. Well, the legend says it's a dirt road, and the other roads are either not indicated, which means if you know, instead of being an interstate or a regular highway, it's the dirt roads that are featured, which means the other roads must have been wagon paths, right? Okay, so in 1877, you're talking about going from here to Marion, you're talking about a wagon path. And it wasn't until you're starting to get to almost the 20th century, the 1890s, 1900s, where you start getting more dirt roads. And I'm not certain when all these were paved, but I'm thinking it had to be about around the time of the First World War or a little after, because it was very expensive. And there was huge arguments on, as usual, how are we going to pay for this thing? Nobody will use, you know, that kind of stuff. And so, even though they had the ability to do it, they just didn't until it became a downright necessity. All right, so anyways, I recommend this book. They've got a copy, they got the original at the Marion Public Library, and then they put a reproduction out on the shelf, which you can consult anytime for free. Just come on in. Nowadays, you have to call ahead, but because of the virus thing, and so they will, and they will spend time with you. And also, it's a great genealogical collection they have there. And if you want help looking up great grandma, they know how to do it. It also has online, and you could go on the internet, and free of charge, they have databases that you can access, including Ancestry.com, which you have to pay for otherwise. It's not the full version, but it certainly could do to get you started. And it also has family search things that are really valuable. I use them all the time, and they're free. Okay, so anyways, that's where I get my stuff. And now, all right, so I think you all know the story about the town switched its name 3 times. Okay, and there's there was a call to the library, it's been a year or so ago, and said, I want to know how Sweetser got its name. And so I started looking around. Well, there was a Sweetser family. Okay, I believe I had located. I think it's south of town, near the Liberty Township line, or I think it is. It's Sweetser was one of the early settlers. It's not the same Sweetser as the bank folks or the grocery store. Actually, in Marion, the Sweetser family that was there at the founding of Marion, who ran the grocery store, which also was the bank, which was also the county treasury, that sort of thing. Okay, different fellow. Okay. Now, in terms of settlement, I gotta give you a little context here. Okay, I'm a history guy, right? You gotta give the context. He's listening, so I gotta do it. Okay. Now, think about the settlement of Indiana. And when I talk in Marion and in Fairmount and like over at Matthews and these places, I'm pretty safe in saying, have people raise their hands and say, how many of you know for a fact that your family way back came here from North Carolina? Well, in any given room, at both black and white, people will raise their hand, be over half of the families, the pioneer families, came from North Carolina, out of there through the Cumberland Gap, into Kentucky, and then up. And a lot of those folks were Quakers. So you've got immediately, you can sort of place, and if you know things about the Quakers and how they worshipped and what their issues were and that sort of stuff, you can do a lot of things with that. It tells you a lot right off the bat. If you know that the settlers of Matthews, okay, came from Virginia. It was originally called New Cumberland, after Cumberland Gap. And those people were not Quakers, and they supported the South during the Civil War. And there was a bunch of trouble down in that area of the county. You see what I'm saying? So the migration sort of sets the tone for later things. Now, as far as I can determine, this area really came from that exotic place called Ohio. A lot of people came from Ohio, and then before that, Pennsylvania, or what was then Virginia, only today it's West Virginia. All right, the mountain folks, the people that lived in the southeast corner or southwest corner of Pennsylvania, the Scots, a lot of Scots Irish people who got tired of 150 years of walking around a mountain with one leg shorter than the other. I'm saying this; these are my own relatives, okay? So I know that, right? Then they moved to Ohio, and then Indiana. It's just that westward pressure, and it all had to do really with real estate and farming. Okay, so you got the land is the basis for the farm, and so you got to go where you can get the land. And all of them, whether they were Quakers from North Carolina or farmers from Ohio, what they were doing was, how are the kids going to get started? All right. Also, how can we leverage the property we have that we've already cleared in some cases, and then come out to Indiana and buy twice as much property? And then big families. All the kids can get situated. All right, and so you have, once the land comes up for sale by the federal government, you're here. Your kids are here, and the first land in this area, in this particular area, was claimed by Samuel Blinn. Now, I don't know if you know, the Blinns are now located on the east side of Marion. Samuel Blinn, I think he was really big into real estate. Because if you look at the old plat maps, there's this part, there's the part east of Marion, there's part. Now, usually you find the same thing within a township. So, for example, if your ancestors came to Pleasant Township, Indiana, a lot of times they bought land sight unseen. I mean, how would you know what you got? Well, you didn't. And so you buy a piece here and a piece there. You could, by the way, put property in your wife's name. So women could own land, could hold title to the land. And what they were doing was, of course, there were limits on how much you could buy. And so you could circumvent those limits by, grandma, mom, that sort of thing. And they had to buy it off the federal government. You do understand that there was no income tax back then. Okay? The only taxes that federal government could collect were excise taxes and customs duties. That was it. They're specifically prohibited from any other form of taxation. Well, we know what happened if you've watched the play Hamilton or seen it on television. Things went bad really quickly with the economy, and so they had to sell that land. There were a whole lot of soldiers in the American Revolution. This might be some of your ancestors. I know it was some of mine, that were promised at the end of the war, we'll pay you. And there were people that needed pensions too. So they said, okay, come on, pay. And the federal government had no money. And you're probably aware of the revolt in Massachusetts. You know, and Washington, those guys were just pretty sick. I mean, we can't have this. We can't have them revolting against the revolutionaries. So they said, we're going to divide up the land and give it to you, basically. There also were my favorite people, my relatives in southwest Pennsylvania, who revolted because they didn't want to pay tax on whiskey. Because what would you do with the corn you grew in 1790? I mean, you can't feed it all to your livestock. You can't eat it. I mean, you could, but it's pretty nasty, you know. You make it into whiskey and sell it down the river systems, down the Ohio, and take it down to New Orleans and liquid gold. It's their version of ethanol, you know. You've got that. And so these people were forced further west, all right, as the land came available. Now, there's a trick about Indiana, though, that was played on just about everybody that settled here. Nobody told them that most of it was a swamp, except in the southern part where it was rocks. Okay, so you got the rocks, you got the swamp. This was swamp. Now, I always tell people in Marion, because so how many of you have a basement? You know, a lot of people, oh yeah, we have a basement. So how many of you have a basement that has a water problem? Yeah. Okay, I mean, I'm sure it's the same way around. You can strike water just about any place. All right, now it's probably turning in, it is a valuable resource and the basis of industry and agriculture and the whole thing, but you can have too much of it. You know, I like to talk about, you know, in the wintertime, if you drive, you know, anywhere around here, okay, if we've had a huge snow like we've had a few in some winters and it melts and those lakes appear, you know, it looks like it's almost a Great Lake from here to Kokomo. Well, that has to do with the groundwater and the fact that there's water, you know, you don't have to go very far and it just lays on top. Now, okay, so we've dealt with it, right, mostly. Back then, when they came out here, they had to clear the trees. All right, this was a swamp. This was not just trees, not just like a nice woods. People, you know, I've tramped around these woods. There's some really nice woods on some of these properties around here. Okay, and you notice they are wet, generally speaking, or at least damp. All right. Well, back then it was the whole place. All right, and it was more than damp. It was like lakes and ponds and that sort of thing. I read here that when Blinn and these people first opened up, and then we're talking like right around here, they didn't dig wells. They would use the pond water. They would use the surface water. Okay, for their personal needs and all that sort of stuff. Now, unfortunately, it's not a good deal to drink surface water, especially in a swamp. I mean, swamps, you know. And then when they started bringing in animals, a big problem was malaria, cholera, tuberculosis, and this was before the industrial era. This was having to do with serious water pollution problems, and even waste disposal in a relatively uninhabited area. So they had to drain the water. Now, they didn't get that job done until they started in the 1870s and 80s. Sweetser had a tile factory, a clay tile factory. But as I understand it, and I'm not sure it was true here, but I know it was true in a lot of places in Indiana. See, I'm from Angola, which was part of the Great Black Swamp. Limberlost and all that. It was a swamp all the way down here. Okay? And over at Salina, Grand Lake St. Mary's, that was done in the early, not 20th century, to drain those swamps. And now they've got a giant pool of agricultural and pesticide waste and pesticides. But anyways, so it had to be done. And now when it came in, they did the burn method of clearing land. All right, they stripped the trees, the bark off the trees as high up as they could get, and then the tree died, of course, and then they set them all on fire, which was what the Indians did. Okay, only the settlers did it big time. Well, look, you had to start generating some money. You had to so you came on the property, you lived in a lean-to for at least the first couple of years. If you're familiar with Lincoln's story, this is Thomas Lincoln. When they came to Indiana, he built them a lean-to that they lived in for I think year and a half before he could get a cabin up. All right, and that's what they did here too. And so first the lean-to, then the cabin. I've talked to people about, what happened to all the cabins? They're not. Some of them are around. I helped a guy, a friend of mine that lives on Old Sugar Place, south of Marion. Used to have a cabin there. I helped him. He bought an old one and he restored it. I helped him put it up. I'll tell you what, I like to kill myself, and him too. It was terrible work. We didn't even have to cut any logs. They were already just setting it up was poplar logs that are 1.5 by 1.5 feet. That's the kind of stuff. Okay, so this is what they're dealing with. This is tough, hard work. This is the whole family's got to be in on this too. And at the same time, you got people getting sick, and then also the really sad problem is this: that if you look in family histories, you'll probably find that great grandpa may have lived to be 80 years old or 90 years old. That wasn't that uncommon. A couple reasons: they worked hard, they ate healthily even though they didn't want to. You didn't eat much meat. You ate sparingly, and so there was that. But also the death rate had to do with infants. Okay, so the reason that the infant mortality, they say, well, the average age span back there was 40. But there were a lot of people over 40 around. If you could make it to 25, you probably were going to make it. You could have a lifespan similar to ours, except for women. And we know the story. I happen to be the grandson of, let's see, 3 of my 4 grandparents all came from families with 5 to 8 kids. Okay, I would suspect it may be some of the same thing if you go back to great-great-grandparents. Now, of those kids, maybe 4 of them or 5 of them lived to adulthood. But if further back you go, there's fewer and fewer of them living to, so multiple death in infancy, or childhood diseases would just kill them. And it's really sad to read diaries and letters. This really was painful. It would be. Thank God I haven't lost a child. There's been a miscarriage in our family, but and so I got a sense of how tragic that must be, burying your own kids. Okay, so I'm saying this as an appreciation of the first settlers, because they had it tough. By the way, if it was in the wintertime and somebody died, chances are you couldn't bury him. If it was a bad winter and the ground was frozen. So you put him in a coffin and did the best you could, and put him in the barn, cover him up, hope to God the wolves don't get in. And there were wolves around here. Okay, and then you had to, in the spring, go out and dig a grave. So anyways, but Blinn got the first land, And that was in 1826. Now, 1826 is interesting because if you went to a government office in 1826 and said, I want to buy, what they would do is just they'd have these maps. You're familiar with the Northwest Ordinance and the Land Ordinance, that's why we have, this the grid system. They did it so that, sections, that sort of stuff, 1, 2, I think we're in, is it 32, 31 or 30, section 31 or 32 right now.
Okay.
Yeah, Sweetser's down here in the corner, and they went across the top 1, 2, 3, wait, this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then down 6, 7, 8, so that you could locate exactly where your land is, but that didn't tell you anything. It could have been in the middle of a water hole. You don't know. All right, but Blinn got it. Now, how did he get it? This is a great question. How did he get this land in 1826? I'm sorry, 1826. How did he get this land when it wasn't officially for sale until 1830? And there were a number of people, I believe the Seacrests as well, and a number of people, the Hummels, which were further north, I believe, right? They had that land before, and then further up north, David Connor and Samuel McClure, that was up on the other side of Mississippi. Samuel McClure was one of the founders of Marion, and a real estate guy. I mean, that guy knew how to do it because he owned the site of Marion, a big piece of it. And he also owned a part of what would be across the Huntington County line in northeastern Grant County, up around Van Buren. Parcels all over the place. Okay, he got it through what was called preemption. So Blinn got this land by preemption. Now, what would happen, again, I don't know how you manage this, but it's really basically squatters' rights. You came out, staked out a piece of property, and then you did some improvement. Put up your shack or your lean-to or whatever, okay? And then what happened was, you lived on it and then in 1830, when the land came for sale, you put in a land claim for that. All right, and you could do that. The government they wanted rid of this. They wanted to get rid of this land, sell this land quickly, and get somebody out there before the Spanish decide to do something strange and take us over, which was a real possibility. Or like in 1812, what if the Brits come back? And what if the Miamis decide that they got a raw deal, which I'll just be honest with you, they did. This was very tentative. So you got to get somebody living on the land. So, okay, and the guy, pardon me, I'm a history teacher, Stop me before I teach more history. Henry Clay, you're familiar with Henry Clay, the senator from Kentucky, okay? They said he was one of the most brilliant men in the U.S. Senate, and the reason for it was that he finished off with a fifth of whiskey every single day. All right, but Henry Clay was interested in what was called the internal improvements. He was the last Whig, really philosophical Whig. Okay, and so what he said was, look, we need to get those guys living on that land, and so, all right, they preempted. Oh, yeah, well, and some of the neighbors are going, he came in here early and he got his piece. Well, he was here. So what are you going to do? See, they had a bad experience trying to kick people off the land. It was with my relatives in southwestern Pennsylvania. Okay, George Washington, one of those people off his ground, and they fought back. Okay, and George let them have it. All right. So if they got it, let them have it. Now, but they got to pay. The normal price was $3.75. By this time, it was $3.75 an acre. Which, if any of you got some property around here, I'll give you $3.70. I'll give you $4. I'll give you $4 an acre. Yeah. So Blinn and those guys would pay $3.75 an acre, and then they would get to register their land with the well, it wasn't the Bureau of Land Management then, but with the federal government, the Land Sales Office, which I believe was in Cincinnati. And if you might want to look, if you own your own property, even if it's just a smaller lot in the neighborhood, you can go online to the Bureau of Land Management, and those things trace fairly easily because it's been registered. Owners, and you can put in your section and your information on where it is on that survey map, and put it in there, and it will look it up for you, and it will show you who the original purchaser was. It might have been Blinn. If you're living in Sweetser, might have well have been Blinn. And then what they'll do is, I think for $1.50, maybe a little more now, they'll actually put a photographic copy of the original document selling the land, and now people do this and they say, I got this picture of this document, and it's signed by Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor did sign it. Well, his name is on the land grants or the land titles for this area. Present 1840, right? Old Fuss and Feathers, hero of the Mexican War. They say he ate too many cold cherries on a picnic and died of something, his stomach puffed, or I don't know what happened. No, that's not true, but they tell it about it. Anyways, okay, so we got the land, and it's sold, and people are starting to live on it, and we talked about the difficulties. Now, oh yes, about Pleasant Township. It encompasses a lot of interesting things, there's a lot of variety in Pleasant Township. People think, oh, it's all flat, No, because the north part, and if you go around here, around Pipe Creek and all that, there's nice, a rolling terrain, that sort of thing. But Pleasant Township was surveyed twice by the U.S. government, and that was an unusual practice. All right, and so that's why people held off. Some of them held off in getting their land registered, because that grid system, because when you get through an area with rivers and that sort of stuff, it can knock it off. And so you have to have. And the other problem was the Treaty of the Wabash. Treaty of the Wabash, 1840, was a treaty that was signed between the U.S. government and the Miami Indians. All right, in which the Miamis relinquished all claims to this area, except for a piece that is, well, it's up there where Battle of 1812 site is. Where the Natural Department of Natural Resources area up there. Okay, that's the Miami Reserve area that was left after the Treaty of 1840. And what they did was, and this, the Miamis, most of the tribe were sent to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. There's more than one. Okay, the Miamis were rounded up, taken to the courthouse in Peru, Indiana, and then down the Wabash on flatboats, and then marched overland first to Kansas, and then to a little tiny area in the northeast corner of Oklahoma, where the official Miami Reservation is. And in reading this, I don't want to go into it too much, because you can read it. It's in the county histories. There was violence between the settlers and the Miami Indians in this area. Now, not particularly Sweetser, but in Pleasant Township, over bad feelings. Well, and also it has to do with Howard County too, because Howard County was part of the reservation, and I think Grant County was organized. Oh, by the way, if you were like Blinn, when he was here in 1829, this would have been Knox County. You familiar with Knox County? The present Knox County? You know where it is? County seat is Vincennes. Vincennes. This was one county. And then as it settled in and they started carving them up and then organizing the counties. And the last county in Indiana to be organized was Howard County. Right, and it had to do with an agreement, in part, not entirely, but it had to do in part with an agreement. Chief Richardville of the Miamis that was his band. And what the government did, they did the same thing with Mashingo Misha up here. They said, okay, we'll recognize you personally as the owner of the land. And that caused huge, you can imagine, huge, I mean, before then, the land was held more or less in common, okay? And so what happened was Howard County was, part of the agreement was that there was to be a county formed, but it would be called Richardville County. And Richardville wanted to be honored as, and the state of Indiana, which I don't know operates any differently now. They said, okay, oh yeah, we'll do it. Okay, Richardville County. And then the next year after they established Richardville County, they changed it to Howard. Okay, so again, that's sort of antagonism. And there are accounts, and yes, it's in this one, but it's also in the other county histories about deliberate murder of Indians, of Native Americans, right around here. Okay, at least one really bad case. I don't know how many others happened, but there was, it was, that's the way it was. Okay, so they were good people, but we all have our failings. We all have troubles here. Okay, now again, we talked about the swamp. We talked about the Native Americans. We talked about the land. And oh yes, now I love this stuff about how they lived. I hope I'm not dwelling too much on the early days, because I love this stuff. I love the pioneer kind of thing. Because just think about it, it's probably your great grandfather out there. This was third world. Okay, they were living in a swamp, and it wasn't even, in the summertime it was hot. It can get really hot in Indiana in the summertime. Okay, if you're in a swamp, it becomes even hotter, and it's got bugs. Oh yes, and the snakes. They are constantly talking about snakes around here. I don't know, you run into many rattler snakes? They rattle snakes. And they talked about, let's see, what's the lady's name? I have it here someplace. Miss Julia. Let's see, I don't have her last name. It said that Miss Julia, oh yeah, there it is, Julia Fox. Julia Fox, as a young girl, would go out and kill snakes around the house because she was scared of them, she didn't like them. And said sometimes she brought in her trophies, like 12 or 15 black rattlers in a basket. Hey, send the kid out to kill the rattlesnakes. And also there were wolves. I mentioned wolves before. A classic story, actually it's from Liberty Township, just across the line here. There was an incident in about 1878 or so about a wolf. They killed a wolf down there that was huge. I mean, I don't know. Of course, everybody lies about hunting stories. That's fishing and hunting. That wolf was 20 feet. No, it was a big wolf. Okay, they said they drug it behind a wagon. They chained it. And it put a chain around it and drug it by a wagon after they killed it. But there's a story about a young lady, and it is Pleasant Township, I'm not sure where exactly, where she talked about she can recall as a young girl in the cabin, and she and her sister, it was one room. Of course, they had a bed by the wall, and they had their comforters, and it was winter time, and they would put the quilts and stuff on top of them, but apparently, that chinking that they used between the logs, well, it would crumble. It was a constant thing to be getting that chinking back. And Dad hadn't had time to. Well, she said she was laying in bed like this, and she opened her eyes, and she looked through that hole in the chinking, and there were some eyes looking in at her. And she said, "Well, that was a wolf." I thought, God, I couldn't sleep for years. You know, he thought the wolf was waiting for you, outside the wolf. Again, now, when they're old, we're all like this. Oh, we can laugh about, right? But, if you're a kid, or really if you're the person involved in it, it really could be quite traumatic. And again, they hunted game. Another thing they did, I guess we're all adults here. We talk about they raised hogs, right? It was not a lot of cattle. Some cattle. Now cattle comes in a little bit later. When this place gets settled, you got markets to attend to. Cattle, it's just a lot of work. Large animals, okay? Now hogs were a little different story, because what they would do, they didn't pen them in. Now we're talking in pre-Civil War times. They let them range, okay? And they branded them, So this is, B for Bill's hog, I mean, we're neighbors, matter of fact, who's Bill and who's his hog, right? And they're going around and they're eating the acorns, and I imagine that ham was awfully good, They're not having corn, all right? They're eating whatever. Well, when it got to be, I think February, March, it's a late winter but early spring, they go out and just, we need to get a hawk, okay? We need to dress them out, all that stuff. So they would go out in small parties, okay, of 4 or 5. You didn't really want to face off a hog that had been living in the wild, without somebody with you,
Yeah.
because I don't know if you've been around hogs much, they could tear you up. Okay. Too bad I can't tell you the story, but I had a great uncle that got ripped up by a hog. Man, he got out of the hog business awfully fast. Okay, but what they do is they go out there and they didn't have a lot of firearms. They were just expensive. Now they'd have a gun, some old blunderbuss, that had hung around in the household since the War of 1812. But I suppose they really packed a wallop if you got them, set up properly. Well, they go out there and they have one guy with a gun. They'd have another guy. Well, all the rest of the guys had these, what I've always heard called pig stickers. They were knives on long poles, or poles that had, get the blacksmith to pound out like a knife, and it fit on the top of these long poles. Now, you track down the hog in this swamp, and you could see where they nested. They build their own. Another problem is hogs are smart. They really are. And so you'd be going through that place looking for that hog, and then you'd see it. Okay? Well, the guy with the blunderbuss, boom, would let that hog have it. Now, you hope to God you killed him, or at least seriously, you probably didn't kill him. You may have stunned him, or got him down somehow. And then the guys with the stickers would come up and start, slicing his neck, and trying to, get him so he's bleeding out. And then they had another guy with a team of horses, and I'm not really familiar with, it's those crossbars and stuff with chains on it, and then they'd wrap the chains around the hog, and then because the ground was frozen, it was easier to drag that hog out, and then they take it back to the house. And now, personally, I've seen what they do with the hog after that. Maybe so you have too. I lived around the Amish. They used a block and tackle, but you get that hog up like that, and then you start everything but the squeal, right? Get the bristles and get that and cut that meat up, and then ham. You do the curing and all that sort of stuff, and this would set you up for a good long time. Okay, so that's how they did it, and let's see, we got that, and okay, now again we talked about James Sweetser and snakes. Oh yeah, wildcats. Wildcats were a problem. I mean, we're talking you know, like those things you think national parks or like in Michigan, or not Michigan, but out west. But wildcats could be a real problem because they're not feral cats. I mean, you know, they're a species of their own. And it said that you know, you could hear them screaming. They make a really loud, piercing noise, and that was another thing that give you a headache at night. You got the wolves peeking into the thing, and you got wildcats screaming, and you know there's snakes crawling around. So it wasn't exactly comfortable. But you know, things are turning better by 1870, after the Civil War. After the Civil War, things started looking up for Sweetser and for Indiana and for Grant County, and it had to do with the demand for agricultural products. Okay, it paid to drain the land, right? And the other thing that happened is what saved Marion and Sweetser and Jonesboro, Gas City, the railroad, the coming of the railroad. The Civil War slowed down railroad development. That railroad development had started before the Civil War, but you know, when the Civil War went on, that all those resources went to dealing with getting soldiers and arms to the South. And by the way, women took a big role in maintaining the farms when the men had gone to the war, and it was tough. There was no safety net, and so people just had to do the best they could. And mom and the daughters and the little kids would be out there, you know, horse farming. Okay, which that's tough. They did it. Now it was at a great loss to income, but after the war, and when the guys came home, there was money to be made, and there was the railroad. And if you weren't on the railroads, you didn't succeed as a town. I mean, it was live or die. And luckily, Sweetser switch, it managed, it got the railroad through here. Marion got the railroad through. And there were, getting a railroad was a, what should I say? It was fraught with bribery and corruption of all kinds, but it was at a high level. I mean, there's not really a whole lot Marion could do or Sweetser could do. It was the best route. Okay, you get that coming out of Marion. See that, and the railroad was the. Let's see, I get these initials. It was Pittsburgh, Columbus, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad that was put through here. It would be right out here, right? Okay, and later, for a while, became Pennsylvania Railroad, and it was also used by the Chesapeake and Ohio for a time. I mean, they used. Okay, so that was, and those the Pittsburgh Railroad was. I don't know what it was called, the mud hole railroad, you know, because it was like not the finest of all, but it was the only one in the only game in town. And it, by the way, in Marion, if you go to the 10th Street station at 10th and Washington that the Quilters Hall of Fame has purchased and will be restoring this summer, they're coming along. COVID set things back a lot. But that station, 1885, was started in 1885, and I'm not sure the dates on this one, but I'm sure it was part of that Pittsburgh and St. Louis thing. It meant that you could get your crops. You didn't have to make whiskey, okay? I mean, you could actually sell grain as grain, right? And bring it to, you know, ship it to the grain terminals. And it was a major east-west Okay, so this again was a good deal. You know, you could get stuff to commercial centers. Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati was the major terminus for cattle and grain and all that going east. But you could also then get things to Chicago, all right, going west. Now, another source of income in this particular area, before the industry started up, and in conjunction with the farming, was lumber. I mean, they even though they burnt a lot of the trees, you know, in order to clear the land, there was still an enormous amount of wood around here. And we're talking old growth timber. We're talking trees 80, 90 feet tall, straight up, you know, walnuts and hickories and poplars and all sorts of things, you know, and good wood. That's another reason why those log cabins are absolute, excuse the expression, hell put together, because those logs weighed a ton. They're very dense, you know. And so what you could do, like old Abe did in Illinois, you know, you could make some money cutting rails, splitting rails for fences, but also cutting ties for the railroad. And when you've got a situation, I read an account of a guy in 1860 that went by horseback from Marion to Richmond and never got out from underneath the canopy of the trees. You know, you've been in woods like that where the sun's almost blocked out. That was like every place. Of course, that gives you the snakes and all that. There's a downside to that too. Okay, but a guy over in Franklin, just across the line, his name was John Kiley, and John Kiley came here from Ireland as a result of famine, and he bought a property not far in Franklin Township, and it's said that in 1 year he cut 1,500 ties. Now that would be him probably and his kids, okay? 1,500 ties, and then had them stacked up, and the railroad took. You see, once you got in Illinois, where are the trees? Kansas, when they're building the railroad, where do the trees come from? Okay, and sometimes on federal census, you know, they list people's occupation. You know, farmer, householder, carpenter, or whatever. You would see woodman. Okay, they didn't call it lumberjack, it was woodman, you know, woodman. And I found relatives that were, that's northeastern Indiana. They stripped Michigan, after they got done with Indiana, Michigan got it big time, you know, they took all the way up to the upper peninsula. They took thousands and thousands of board feet out to build the railroads. So there were guys doing that, so there was money, there was money in the economy, okay? And the farms were doing all right, except 1877, not many years after Sweetser was founded, was a major agricultural depression in the United States. You know, it's the same story where, production lags. Well, production lags behind demand, but then it exceeds demand. You know, it's always doing I know my grandfather used to say it's the farmer's lament. You know, we're always behind the thing. You know, it's already happened. You know, the good deal is gone when somebody tells us, hey, there's a good deal out there, and it's not alone, you know, that sort of stuff. And so there was that. Now, the thing about the railroad, though, then Sweetser starts getting some industry and some commerce, because you know, when you're doing farms, you got stores, you got you know, commercial establishment, which is, you know, right along here, and you also get, for example, again, that clay tile business. So it's generating income, and you get the churches. Now, absolutely essential to any community, any of these communities in their development, was the school, the church, and the stores in a commercial establishment. Okay. Now, if one, it's like a three-legged stool. If one of those legs are broken, the whole thing kind of falls apart. All right, and I think this is why you've got such a nice place now, and you know, and then Swayze down the way, and Converse, you know, Gas City. Van Buren, I don't know. Van Buren's, it's still there, and there's a lot of people living there, but I don't know if Van Buren's is on a good situation, you know what I'm saying? This being east-west, and between Marion and Kokomo, and, you know, Wabash is just up the way, so it's ideally situated, so if you're gonna, you know, do some industrial stuff. And then, of course, what happened was the gas boom in 1883. You know, we're all sitting on a giant pocket of gas, and it's still there. Okay? But it's not worth getting it out of the ground. What they did was the pressure got released. Now, there's not nearly as much as there once was. There's a engineer for the state of Indiana in, I want to say 1887, which was only like 4 years after the gas boom started, said the gas will run out in 1904. It did. He was right. 1904. And before that, Sweetser had a glass factory. All right. Converse had glass factories. Matthews, Gas City, and Marion had, you know, major glass factories, including the Ball brothers. Of course, to Marion's everlasting, what should I say, sadness, the Ball brothers didn't stay. You know, they decided to go to Muncie. They already had factories in Muncie. So the gas business was a boom and bust thing, but it did support a lot of people and bring money and bring new people. Okay, and so that sort of established a pattern. Now, had in the 20th century, and I'm going to stop here, I'm going to sort of maybe summarize some stuff. I think the fact that also saved areas like this. The railroad basically went away by 1950, I believe. I mean, there was no passenger service. I think passenger service was all gone, wasn't it, by 1950 or what, later? 60?
I was in the service and I went
Okay,
in
and that was
1953 by railroad.
okay. So around there, but it wasn't much longer that they took away the passenger, and then later the consolidate. Now this had nothing to do, actually, with say us. It had to do with the national consolidation of the railways and that sort of business, and the changing trucks, the arrival of competition of trucks, but the consolidation of schools. For some places, it was a boon, and for other places, it was a disaster. And I believe it was a boon for here. I believe so. I mean, you can correct me. I realize these things were like war. They were in where I went to school. I was past that date, but they were still mad about it 15 years later. I mean, it was like, you know, we're from an outlying town, and that school, they're going to put it in Angola, and then that means our school's going to close down, and you know, Eastbrook's going through still, or they're pretty well settled it now, but you know, there was questions about elementary schools and where they would be and that sort of stuff. But you guys have a wonderful school, and it really close by. I think Madison Grant has some of the same sorts of things. So it didn't necessarily, well, some of it maybe, but it didn't mean the town was wiped out. Because if you lose the school, you lose your identity. You know, unless you can figure out a different arrangement so that how the school supports your identity. You know, every so often somebody gets a crazy idea. Oh, you know, we got too many high schools. Why don't we just have one? Oh no, that's not going to happen. Okay, I mean, it's maybe sometime, but I can't see it within. You know, you've got sports, which is an important thing. You've got the whole cultural thing. You know, this is where most of the small communities, including Sweetser, you know, is very connected with the school and what they're doing, and the families are there, and there's a lot of tradition built up, and so again, I think that was a saving thing. The other thing was technology. And it had to do with having a number of smart people. And I'll just say that, or at least a number of people who recognized the importance of something like the internet, Comtech. You know, I can remember in the day when it was like, you know, you had to dial in, and you know, I was banning my children from you can't use that phone, but I'm on the internet. You know, before cell phones and all that stuff. And then now the ethanol plants and all sorts of really, really cool, interesting things. And of course, General Motors. You know, a lot of people from General Motors live here. A lot of folks live in here. Now, not so much anymore, though. You know, it has to do with their changing their policy. You know, where people transfer from plant to plant and they're no longer attached for a long time to a particular location. So technology, schools, and also you know, the churches. All churches, I guess, are in trouble because of money issues and, you know, falling off of attendance. But there's still a core, I think, out there. So my prediction is you'll last 150. You're good for another 150. You know, just stay tuned. So I talked a lot. So can I answer some questions, or have I been wrong? If I'm wrong, say, hey, no, you're not right, and we'll correct it.
Well, I think it was very interesting, the settling of the area, because we're thinking 150 years, the town was just formed and grown from them, but there was quite a bit of history as far as the people getting here to start with, so I never really thought about that per se. I did know that this was swampland, I read that somewhere, but that is pretty interesting, the first part.
I didn't mention also some of the intermediate industries like the canning tomato business and craft foods and that sort of thing. Now, those provided a lot for the community. Now, those kind of industries, you know, are never permanent, no matter. It's only when. It's not if they will move on or they will change. You know, I think we've been really lucky with General Motors. You know, and it's a good plant. It produces things. Luckily, we've got Fort Wayne. You know, we've got a tradition of that. But you know, it could go. But as we and Marion found out about RCA Thompson, you know, so
GM went away in Kokomo, pretty much.
I'm sorry, what?
You were
GM
talking
went
about
away in
you were talking
Kokomo.
about the drainage in the Grant County
Right.
in this area.
You know, I'm just saying, GM.
There's only a 5-degree drain from in Grant County to the reservoir, so that's probably why there's so much standing water.
Yes, and it also has to do. It's why the soil is so rich.
That's right.
I was reading and I'm not by any means an authority on geology, but apparently the soil people say that because of that, you're not getting really a huge variety of productivity
Right.
over large areas. Because like up where I'm from, Steuben County, my great-grandfather said he was the biggest rock farmer in Steuben County, you know? And then the guy down the way was growing things that would just kind of throw the seeds out and boom, you got it. And the next guy is, you know, like I say, growing rock.
Right.
But that's not the case. I mean, it's really fairly evenly distributed because so's the water. And so it's soaking down in there and
Yeah,
things
right.
come up.
Another thing that I thought was funny about when I moved into this area, we noticed that we could be talking to somebody about somebody else, and they would say, "Oh, they're my relation," and these people were all kind of intermarried in this area. So we asked an old fellow that lived in this area all his life why that was, and he said, "Well, when we were younger, we had to go see our girlfriends on horseback, and you didn't go very far."
Well, another thing too is that we think of the pioneers as the lone, you know, the family, the mom and dad and the kids in the wagon, but usually it was the whole neighborhood or the whole church.
Yeah.
You know, the young people in the church, that's how, by the way, that's how Oregon got settled. It was the Presbyterian church out east. Their missionaries came back and went to the churches and you got to come to Oregon. And what would happen is they get whole bands of kids from the same town, they'd go on the wagon train. But it's the same way here. These people, a lot of people, you can trace a straight line from like Marion, Ohio to Marion, Indiana. Okay, from just north of Columbus, it is a straight line. In northern Indiana, where I'm from, you can trace a straight line from New York, Pennsylvania, and across northern Ohio, and then you can even take it further because starting about 1880, when people started going out, well, even before then, like even 1840, they started going out to Missouri, northwest Missouri, and then across into Iowa, which they thought was absolute heaven. You want to say the topsoil, they have topsoil is 6 feet deep out here, you know? Well, and that's what they did. They just followed that line, and they would say, the cousin would write and say, hey, you got to come out here. You got to come out here to Indiana because there's some property available. You can pick up for a song, and it's already improved. And you know, then there are also some people. There are always these big fights, like Grandpa in Ohio would die, and there were like 4 sons, and one of those sons would end up with the farm. And then you get some people zooming back from Missouri, and come on, we get a piece of that farm, you know. And all this competition for stuff also engender things. But family histories follow those same things, and often down even to the same neighborhood. You know, like a township in Pennsylvania becomes a township in Indiana, becomes a township in Iowa.
May I just affirm what you said?
Sure.
My great-grandfather moved from southern Ohio because his brother had come to Mir and written back about how fertile the farmland was. And so he moved here and they settled, and then I think his brother moved all out west, but he stayed here and brought his family. And then, you know, just what you were saying, they came from southern Indiana came from different places to settle here. And then they did lose a child, who was saying about the malaria.
Yeah.
And then he saved up the money to buy south of Sweetser here is where we settled, where he settled. And my grandfather helped with, which I didn't ever know, but helped with organizing Sweetser in the beginning too. So a lot of what you said is kind of my own history,
Yeah,
my family history.
it's great. It's our roots.
Yeah,
It's our roots.
exactly.
I remember Grandma, a driver. She didn't drive very well in her old age. Well, she did drive, but not well. And she'd say, "Take me out to see the home place." You know, which had passed through 3 or 4 people since she was a girl. You know, it wasn't the home place, but it was. You know, let's drive by and see what they're doing with that. You know, well, my dad would have had a fit if he just saw what they're doing out there. So it's good to know. Oh, I know I'm taking your time. If you have documents or pictures, especially photographs, one of the saddest things, I would go around to sales, you know, and pick up stuff, you know, and the antique stores and whatever, and they'd have these baskets full of pictures, you know, brown tones and even some tintypes, you know, where they've been purchased at an auction or something. The trouble is, for a historian and for libraries and places, they can't use them. I mean, unless they've got something really identifier in there. I know I bought a picture of a farm taken, it was down by Summitville, and it was taken like in 1890. You could tell by, it had a steam thresher, and it had, you know, the ladies had the table set, you know, for the workers, you know, with the tablecloths, and it was the whole farm. It was kind of like these pictures, you know, only it was a photograph. Luckily, I bought it in an auction for $5, and it turned out that a relative of the old grandpa that was still around but not communicating, was able to sit down with me and say, okay, now this is our farm, and that was this, and that was this, and that was this. Because those are valuable. I mean, not necessarily in cash, but they're valuable for historians. And they'd be valuable for your descendants and genealogists too. So if you have pictures, be sure and identify them. Actually, nowadays, photographs can be copied really easily. And most libraries, including Marion Public Library, if you have photos and would rather keep them, which is, I understand, you can take them down there and they will copy the pictures for you and then take down the information and they will be always available. So don't, postcards, some farms actually had postcards made of their place so they could send it to Aunt Minnie and, you know, in Iowa, so they could compare notes. So the ones I like with the entire family sitting on the front porch. The grandpa, you know, sitting in the middle, you know, those people, they were Swiss. I could tell because they wore a beard with no mustache. You know, like the Amish.
Mhm.
They were brethren, but you know, so that you could say, oh man, and that guy was. You could all tell they had these eyes that looked like foxes. You know, they all blue-eyed. Anyways, you got a great heritage here. You should be proud of it. I'm sure you are.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I saw in Indiana, Grant County was the first county to be all paved roads.
Yes, and that would have been in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1920s. Oh God, you read the old papers. See, they got all the papers. Most of the papers for Grant County are on microfilm at the library, and oh boy, talk about scandal. I mean, somebody's brother getting getting a contract and this and court suits and all this sort of stuff, but it got done. I say we're still like that, you know, fighting this and fighting that and fighting that. Somehow it does get done, but it's takes twice as long. It costs twice as much, but that's the way we do it.
Yeah. We have one back here.
So how did Sweetser actually get the name?
Okay, well, what he said. Let me get this exactly. Okay, well, it has to do. It was called Sweetser for the Sweetser family, but it was then Sweetser switch, which everybody thought when this place started going, they said that's not quite, as uptown as we'd like to be because we're a going place. We're on the largely dropped the switch, right? And so there's no really big, it's like Marion. Marion was. I think Samuel McClure they picked the name. It was Francis Marion, the Revolutionary War hero, because back then they would do, and then up in Miami County where they got Peru and Chile and Santa Fe and all those places, those were all named during the Mexican War, because they all had relatives down there fighting in the Mexican War. So it's we like to think there's some I don't think there's any big major story. It's just. Apparently they thought that Sweetser worked, and apparently the Sweetsers were admired, but it wasn't any sort of because he won a battle in a war or something like that.
Were they like one of the founding families or something then?
Well, they were one of several. They weren't a founding family, in the sense like they were the first ones in here. They were one of the early. They could have called this place Blinn.
Well, that's
if
right,
you really
because
wanted to
you
name
kept
it after.
saying he bought all this land, and I'm going, well.
And one must have sold it off to different people that
Yeah.
settled within the town here, and then they decided to register as a town or whatever.
Well, it organized as a town. What 1870 is that the?
Yeah.
71.
71.
See, that was 1871. Marion organized as a town in 1870. All right. See, what happened was these places just sort of just grew, and after the Civil War, they thought we better get more organized because that was just the thing to do, to organize local government, so to let contracts, and the railroads insisted. What are you going to call your place? See, they had problems with Hartford City. Why is it called Hartford City? Well, it was called Hartford. Well, when they put a post office in there, the government said, no, you're not going to call yourself Hartford because your mail is going to end up in Connecticut. Okay, and they say, all right, we'll call ourselves Hartford City. Will that work? Yeah, that works. So it's just like what they did with immigrants. If your name was too long, they shortened it. So we'll call you Joe. So yeah, it was convenience for the railroads and the post office. Oh, that was the other thing that was important. You know, hold on to those post office for dear life, you know, cause that was the only way people got most of the stuff they had from Sears, you know, and did business through the post office. Well,
Is there anybody online that wants to ask a question? We've got a handful of people there. Just turn your mic on and then we'll call your name if you wanna ask a
Wanda
question.
Williams is there.
Yeah.
She-
Wanda's out there, several other people.
Wanda
Or I don't
Snuck.
see any of them turning their
Wanda Snuck.
microphones on, so maybe they don't have a question out there.
Or maybe they decided to change the channel. That's what kids are doing, by the way, with distance learning now. They check in and then turn off the stuff, and then they're gone. You can't call on them.
So I know we got a lot of history, in this area. I've heard different things, I've read different things. You're talking about the snakes. One of the, being a Lions member, I was going through some old books and notes, and I guess they used to pay like 10 cents for every rat tail or something like that. Apparently rats were real bad out in the farms, and they would pay a bounty on rat tails. Because they just go across the whole field, and if you're out there on your tractor, they'll just come right up on the wheels. From what the stories, then maybe that's a big story, but apparently it's a good one. But I remember reading some different old minutes or things in Sweetser Lions. Apparently they maybe paid. I don't know if it's in the immediate area, but I could see where that could be a whole herd, like your wild hogs or pigs or whatever, rats developing or whatever. So I thought that was kind of neat. But so as far as the town, we'll move away from lines of hair, but promote what's coming up in the fall or in August. We do have the sesquicentennial coming up, August 21st. So we got a lot of things planned. There's a table out there. There's stuff online telling what all items we're doing. It's all going to be a one large day of celebration. So I'm not going to tell you what we all have. It's online. You go to Facebook page, Sweetser, Sesquicentennial, 1871 to 2021. Like I say, there's many forms and sign up things for different things we have going on that's either online or at the table in the town hall lobby. But we are really getting excited as far as everything that we are anticipating having to go on. One thing, we'll be opening the time capsule right outside the lobby here. That'll take place that day. It'll be interesting to see what's in there, and then what are we going to leave behind for people 50 years from now to discover. So a big day. So does anybody else have any questions? If not, we'll end this portion of our Lions meeting. You're free to stay. We're going to talk a little bit of business, not a whole lot. We got a couple things we got to talk about. If you want to stay online and listen in, you can do that too. But thank you, Bill, for coming by. We do have something for you here. A token of our appreciation for coming by and enlightening us about the area around here.
A square inch of Sweetser's property, right?
Well, so I'd like, you gotta find that picture of that railroad station in here. I think, if the history tells me true, that would show the train depot. I thought you had a picture. I thought I saw it in here.
Well, they sort of scatter them around a little bit. So there's Pleasant. Here's Pleasant. I don't think they have a picture of this railroad station.
I thought I saw it.
Now.
Oh, you had it. You got it on the laptop.
Yeah, right. That's
It's on the laptop.
again, that article, and you might want to get for your centennial. The library will run you a copy that you can take it to a printer because it's good stuff, and it's a good. There's the school. Yeah, they use it right in the front. No.
Do I have my glasses? I don't even have my glasses on. How am I going to see that?
Well, I can make it bigger right here.
Okay. That right there, I think was the Sweetsers. Anyway, it may or may not be that, but this side here could possibly do that. This board right down here,
Oh, okay.
that is, we believe, the original Sweetser sign on the railroad depot.
It's got, a lot of pictures of the boys taking a break here. And, but it's a very good article. It's not very long, but it's a good account of, the development of the town.
Yeah, we've had there's a whole handful of churches in town. Some are still here, some have left.
Yeah.
A lot of towns, a lot of churches,
I think the first church was a Methodist church. I think most of the first settlers, and that was the same thing, because they came from the same place. A lot of times their families attended the same church, and then when they came out to an area, they just did that, until the place grew and we got outsiders in. So.
well, we do love our town. We hope it continues to be a nice, what we would call a bedroom community in a lot of places, but we're close to town for what we need. Roads and everything as they are now compared to then.
And Pierce can ride his bike to work.
Absolutely. How about, I said when they got the Cardinal Greenway into Marion, I'd ride my bike to work and I'd get to do it. But, yes, transportation is a major reason, I would say, because like you say, the railroad, running the line from here into Marion, I don't remember, because that's before my time, running into Marion on, was it called the Autobahn, interurban or something like that?
It was an interurban.
And, to go in and out of town. So, they could ran all the way out east or west like that.
You could go to Kokomo, Indianapolis,
Yeah.
Anderson, and those cars would run, some of them would run 70 miles an hour. And they were electric. And the first ones were gasoline, but the problem was that the crossings weren't marked. And there were a lot of people get smashed to pieces when the car came through.
Ooh.
And there was almost industry among attorneys to sue the interurban lines, because there was a standard fee that they would pay for grandpa, which is about $10,000.
Huh.
But that could really set you up. $10,000,
Just roll them right on out there.
Chuck, I'd like to ask him, which one of the roads was the toll road? There's supposed to have been a family or someone
Yeah,
built a toll road
from
through,
here to Kokomo.
from here to Kokomo?
Yeah, well, actually wasn't Marion, I think it was, it would have been south of Marion, and it was this guy and his family did it, and they did it in 1 year. Now, when they say build a road, what they meant was they cut a trail.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't imagine what that thing, it must have been they just came through, with axes and size and whatever, and then they just made a route from, to Kokomo.
And then they charge
Oh,
a
yeah,
toll to
yeah,
use it, huh?
yeah,
That's pretty neat.
All right, well, we thank you once again,
thank you.
and maybe we'll see you out here on August 21st.
I'll
Trails.
come out.
All right.
You wanna show one of our banners?
Which one?
All right, so if you want to stay for our Lions meeting, you're more than welcome to stay. Well, we do just got a little bit of business to do.
Sure.
Yeah, if you need a,
Stretch and
yeah, well, I'm gonna pick back up in about 5 minutes. If there is a bathroom back there in the corner, if you need to use that.
Anybody that gives 150 plus the 150 above, you get the certificate. You get the certificate, and I make copies and put them up there. And then the day of assessment centennial will have, as far as I know, all those names will be on the banner. I know we're still
You need to
talking
turn the
about
phone
it, but
They may have ran out of batteries.
I'd like to see all the 150 plus, mentioned.
Okay, another thing.